Welcome to another episode of Real People. I'm your host, Barbara, and this is our resident filmmaker, Emmett H. Thrower. So, Emmett, tell us a little bit about what we will see today.
Barbara, today's film is something that I'm sure most of you can relate to. What you're going to see is part one, called Dr. John, and you'll find out a little bit more about him and about his experience with the patients and clients that he served down in Atlanta. So here we go for part one of Essentially Yours, Dr. John.
I'm Dr. John Wayne Wilson. Clients know me as Dr. John. I'm in private practice. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been in private practice for about 8 years. Work with individuals and work with couples, and I work with family members. Shortly after the beginning of 2020, as information started coming out from the CDC and from local and state and national government agencies, I kept my office open for a month or two. Have no idea as to when I'm going back in my office due to how the virus has continued to spread. And so if I'm around people, I want to know what their vaccination status is. So if people are vaccinated, I'm more okay with being around them. But otherwise, if they're not, then I have a mask on, or I pretty much stay home. Which means I've isolated myself from things I like to do, people I like to hang out with, and also my clients were becoming concerned about being out in public, and they also were being shut down at work and having to work from home. So people just saw it as a way to not having to go to work, being out of traffic. So it wasn't particularly stressful at that point. Most people that I work with kind of experienced it as an extended vacation. Government agencies, some of them, state politicians, local government kept putting out these arbitrary dates when we're going to get back to work, back in the office. I think that is when I noticed a shift in my clients' levels of stress. Uncertainty was very high. And when uncertainty is very high, people experience a lot of stress, mood shifts, anxiety levels go up. We like predictability, and so that's just a human thing. And so when that is questioned or in doubt, mental health issues start coming up. And so what I started doing with clients was like warning them, like, look, I know you feel pretty much the same as you did back in February, but I want you to assume that you're dealing with a higher level of stress, which means you're dealing with a higher level of anxiety. And so that means you need to be more mindful of self-care. Unfortunately, some of the things that people do for self-care are outside of the home and in public, and those places were shutting down. So movie theaters, bowling lanes, clubs. There was also pressures for restaurants to kind of shut down or contain their services. So the things people would ordinarily do, they couldn't do. And so they were forced to be creative, inside the house. And that sometimes was difficult. The more introverted you were, it seemed like the easier the transition was. Because I think people recognized that what COVID was making them do, they ordinarily would do anyway. It was the people who were more extroverted that struggled outwardly with that. But as the year went on, that was also, during that time, there was also when there was increasing amount of political unrest with the upcoming presidential election. There was racial unrest, and there was a heightened focus on police interactions with people, police brutality, and with the protesting. That, on top of the COVID, provided a cocktail of stress inducement that many people had not experienced in their life, especially young people. Some people were becoming demoralized. Some were becoming more activated. Many people were very pessimistic, especially young folk. A particular client of mine was very pessimistic about how things would be in the United States. He had not lived through this kind of unrest. He had not experienced this kind of concern around health, and so he was thinking that that society would just unravel. And so so part of my work was to kind of help him have a more balanced perspective on all that. So I had to use my experience as a kid to kind of help balance out some of my clients' perspectives on what was going on now, that this too shall pass. This will not escalate to whatever narrative you're creating in your head. It was interesting. Some couples found being at home working and being isolated actually was a benefit to their relationship. COVID eliminated a lot of distractions that we have in our life. COVID didn't allow you that latitude to be distracted from these things, because you're with your partner almost 24/7, and so because primarily everybody was having to work from home, and so it was a tough time. And a few kids that I was working with at the time were having difficulty not being able to kind of like live their lives as teenagers or as in middle school. They were missing their friends. They couldn't play outside. Their parents were like really containing their movement. So some of them thought their parents were being just too strict. So they started experiencing depressed moods, a lot more anxiety. And so, it started impacting kids' mental health in a very significant way. And so some of my clients were considering, like, I may need to quit my job because I do not want to put my kids' health or lives in danger, or my partner's lives in danger. And so, and even some of the people who are working in hospitals, just the things they had to do when they came home, they couldn't go home and just hug their kids or hug their partner. They had to do this whole cleaning routine. But that was hard for healthcare workers and also for the families of healthcare workers. People were looking for information. A lot of people weren't looking in the right places. So they go to some search engine like Google, or they go to YouTube and find somebody. Then you had these kind of what's called cognitive distortions come into play, where people were looking for information that confirmed some idea they had in their head that would then lead them to behave in a particular kind of way. Didn't mean it was correct information, didn't mean that the behavior was healthy, but that confirmation bias allowed people to kind of like deal with their anxiety or their concern. They were setting up themselves to sabotage their mental health because they weren't really doing self-care things, and they weren't dealing with reality that was really there. It was whatever they found to kind of fit their internal dialogue, unfortunately, they would go with. Confirmation bias, feeling somehow that, I'm immune. The things that we typically say that young people attribute to, like when they're doing risky things. I find it doesn't matter what age. People, I work out, I eat healthy, my body, so I don't need to be concerned about COVID. Or when the narrative of COVID was just like the flu, using that as a reason for not either being concerned about the virus. Then of course you got the QAnon and all that other stuff about it's a conspiracy, and so all this is floating around and it's causing a lot of mental distress for a lot of people. And some family members, they split with one another over COVID, thinking it was a political thing. I'm in control of my body, and I'm not. You can't mandate me, make me do something. Most of our lives are mandated by certain things. We get in the car, we put a seatbelt on. Now it's the norm. We don't even think about it. But I did see an old 1982, I believe, news story about when seatbelts were being mandated, and the very same arguments that are being expressed now were being expressed then.
It is the new seatbelt ordinance. If the town council gets its way, seatbelts will be mandatory for everybody riding in the front seat of a car through Richland.
I'll have to detour the town to get to Kalamazoo. If they pass a seatbelt ordinance where I don't use a seatbelt.
I wouldn't wear my seatbelt. If I get caught, I get caught.
I hear it's uncomfortable. It wrinkles my clothes. It's not cool.
There's no freedom no more. You don't want to wear it? That's your choice.
So we could have transplanted that and just taken out seatbelts and put masks, and it would be entirely the same.
That's still in play right now. Most real dangers we have, it's kind of concrete. You can see or something, but the virus, you can't see. You have no idea whether you're carrying it or not. So once again, they use whatever narrative in their head to say that, I'm not in danger. That's up north, or that's that out west. That's not here in my part of the country. So a lot of people got left out in the cold because you're not getting support if you're around people who don't believe it's real. Many of the healthcare workers I worked with, because I know I worked with some doctors who worked in emergency, the amount of deaths increased, especially among seemingly healthy and younger people. And death came quick. Or if you have a couple, because there were some couples who died a week apart, and they were like 30 in their 30s or early 40s. That's hard to swallow. And so your mortality is put in your face, like this can happen to anybody. So that uncertainty was a real thing, and we don't like uncertainty. We like I said, we like things to be certain because we can predict it. At least we feel like we can. Now I call that the delusion of control, where we expect and want to feel like we're in control, even if it's delusional, even if it's not based on truth or accuracy. It's hard to make healthy and good decisions when you are not dealing with what's going on in a real way. But as long as that narrative is in your head, like I've told many of my clients, when you create a narrative, it is always perfect in your head. At some point, reality will force its way into your world. Take care of yourself. And so, like, you can't go get a spa, you can't do yoga, you can't do some of these other things. But self-care also includes being honest with yourself, being straight with yourself, and checking yourself. Because we as humans, we have a tendency of putting on rose-colored glasses. So any change, whether it's a change you want or don't want, whether it's a change that feels good or feels bad, change in of itself produces stress. People are going to be battling with or dealing with wanting things to be back how it used to be. The reality is nothing ever goes back to how it used to be in some earlier point in time. So the ability to which you can accept that things are different now will assist you in reducing the amount of stress you experience and helping you with the transition to creating whatever norm is going to be the norm at that time. People are going to have to still continue to adapt and then accept the adaptation they have to make. What I always suggest to people and encourage people to do is accept that this is the reality, accept that things are going to be different, but this gives you an opportunity to create a new norm in the future. Coronavirus is not going away. It can be, I imagine it will be managed better, and it will be, the amount of incidence of this being around will decrease, but you have the opportunity to create a new norm. It's not going back to how it used to be. This is the new reality. But this new reality will be gone at some point. There'll be another one. So grab a hold of that and make that, what you want. Well, one of the things I talk about with my clients is being selfish. Now, when I say selfish, I'm not talking about how people normally or typically talk about selfish behavior. I'm talking about behaviors that are focused on yourself and your physical, spiritual, and emotional well-being. People are emotionally exhausted, spiritually exhausted, and of course physically exhausted. And so you have to attend to those things. You have to go outside your box. So if you've never done meditation, you may need to try it. If you've never done yoga, you may need to try it. If you're not working out, you may need to start doing that. You have to be creative. So, for example, one of my clients last year, he decided to take his family, wife and 2 kids, on a during the pandemic, before the vaccine, on a cross-country trip in an RV. They rented an RV and they just drove a country, which was one of the best things he said he's ever done for himself and his family. But the family was able to connect in a way they hadn't been able to do ever, really, while also disconnecting from the stressors of work. That wouldn't have happened unless COVID had come around. If COVID was not around, him and his wife would have been working the way they always worked. The kids would have been in school like they always would have been. They would have taken their traditional trips or whatever, see family, holidays. They wouldn't have considered renting an RV and traveling across the country for 3 to 4 weeks. If they were willing to do that, they handled COVID and the restrictions and the isolation much better. For some individuals, that was difficult to do. You had to decide for yourself, even if it went against, how your family thought about things or did things, or how friends thought about or did things. You had to really do what you felt was going to be best for you and to try certain things. I'd had several clients who were considering quitting their jobs, but they loved their jobs. They just hated if the upper management didn't take it serious, or they didn't feel like they were being supported, If they felt like their bosses just wanted them to come back into the office or come back in just so I can see you work. And so that's what they really were not liking. And so that became a daily stressor. And so part of my role was to kind of help people kind of pull that apart and help them really understand like what was making them feel the ways they were feeling, and put things in its proper place so they can make the best decision for themselves and their family if they had to, and understand consequences to all choices and opportunities to all choices, which can be hard in this atmosphere.
So thank you for attending. So right now, if you have any comments or questions, you can just unmute yourself or use the reaction button to raise your hand. And who we have on panel today is Dr. John Wilson and also Emmett H. Thrower, the director and producer. So we're open for any comments or questions.
Well, I'm not going to be shy. Let's get to this now. First of all, congratulations, Yogi, man. That thing was deep. That was deep.
Thank you.
It took me through. First of all, I remember where I was when it started in March, and then by August, I had to relocate to Montana and do what God said do. But I remember a lot of the trauma I had experienced. But until I saw your movie, I didn't realize, because I had some tears of like saying, "Whoa, I went through that. Whoa, I went through that." There's a healing process going through for me even right now. I want to thank Dr. John for his expertise on it, on how he gave out a lot of important information. But what kept me going was my personal relationship with the Lord and the Holy Spirit that kept me through all that, to keep my sanity. You know, being a youthful 67, I had to keep maneuvering. You know, you need to do 2 more documentaries, one on the youth, what they went through, because I have a 29-year-old and I had to constantly encourage him. And I said, yo, man, I understand, because you should be out there sowing your oats, doing your thing. But you got to use what they kept telling everybody in the beginning, wisdom. Wisdom was me, I'm high risk and I know it. Whenever I went out, mask on, gloves, sanitizer. I didn't play that. I wasn't trying to intellectualize or anything else. I followed the instruction. Second of all, I'm reminded of a saying, adapt and change and adapt. And that self-care is very important. And that I remember as being a senior, how I had to maneuver. 7 o'clock as a senior, I was out in the stores and back home. You had to use a lot of wisdom navigating all this. Also on I don't know if I'm an introvert or outrovert, I just knew I could maneuver anyway, you know, because I had hobby, I had skills. I had between media, I have, you know, doing ministry, encouraging others and letting them know that this too shall pass. That's true. But in the meantime, use this time to work on you, fall in love with you, you know, encourage one another, you know, because I use this time as well as my mother had just got through having her spinal surgery, 2 years of taking care of her, and I was exhausted. And I'm like, oh God, and then everything shut down until June when the Lord told me to go. But I used that time to rest. I used all this time to connect with family, encourage and love and make memories. Yes, I remember going into Grand Central when your niece was talking about going into the city. The streets were so empty. I remember coming down because I had to meet somebody at Grand Central. I looked and I said, man, this thing is straight out sci-fi. You know, like the world had just about ended and everything. There was nobody. Even trying to go down into the terminal, hardly anybody. Everything was either roped up or something. It was learning how to maneuver through this. Also, me, I'm not vaccinated because the Holy Spirit already told me that I would have an allergic reaction, I would die. So that's why I use constant wisdom. But I remember my family members, all of them calling me stupid and this and that. I said, whatever. What I have to do what the Lord is telling me to do, because I know. He said, you have allergic reaction, and I know his voice. What I look like, I'm getting ready to die. And remember what God said. He gonna say, well, did I tell you not to? So for everybody, it's different what they have to do. What you must do to take care of you is your responsibility. It means getting more information, wearing the mask. I live in Montana. I'm gonna make you all laugh. Here in Montana, there's a law. They don't mandate you to take any shots. So we have half the people with shots, the other half not. Half of them wearing masks and the other half not. Me, every time I go, I got my mask on. I'm not even playing that. I'm not playing Russian roulette because wisdom is wisdom. It is a virus. The difference between the COVID-19 that I'm seeing and the influenza that happened years ago is that we just in a technological era where there's more information coming out and people are seeing more and more fear is coming out. So, and that delusion control, I like that, Dr. John. That was real good. Delusion of control. Good stuff, man. I had to holler. And that's about it. That's all I had to say. But I want to thank you so much. Great job. And you need to do one on the youth and one on the seniors, how they had their adapt image.
Well, you're a brilliant documentary filmmaker. The way that you structured this story with the interviews and the way that you allowed for the interviewee to tell that story, it was just remarkable. And I'm wondering about the process that you did with the people that you interviewed. Did you have a pre-interview meeting with them in advance, or did you just go straight into it? Because it was just so natural.
Okay, well, my process is probably way different than most documentary filmmakers, because I believe that films like documentaries, which I love, develop themselves. Let people tell their stories.
I feel that, yeah.
My creativity is taking what they give me and creating on that. So I have no preset, definite way of how anything should go. I may give them, these are some questions I may ask you, but I don't do a pre-interview or try to overly
right.
prepare.
And you know what? That's why it doesn't read as like straight up journalism. Like you made this into a work that really relates to people's human experience. And, you know, I was touched by it. I needed this. This was medicine for me because I was remembering those empty streets, and I was remembering each of those moments that these people were so generous to share their personal experience and their struggle. And I felt it, and it was such a great way of constructing the film. So formally and just emotionally on every level, this is a brilliant document, and it will go down in history as the synopsis of these pandemic times. I guarantee, because it is just such a brilliant work.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the online schooling, because I was teaching at York College in Jamaica, and then we got kicked into this online schooling, and it was so horrific. I mean, granted, it was also the first semester that it was the middle semester that they kicked over, but qualitatively and I saw it. I ended up just retiring. I was so frustrated. I was so frustrated by the qualitative aspects of the online training. And I want to say something about this film. You know, I see Dr. John. Of course, the first thing that pops in my mind is the great musician who died a couple of years ago. You know, so what the title, what the film? I know it was a pandemic film, but it just was. You know, it was in my mind. I was thinking of musical rhythms and visually, and I know this because I know your work. You know, I know your work well. Visually, it flowed. I'm not just talking about. I saw you got pop drifted incidental music there. You know. But visually, the way that you constructed it with the interviews and interspersing with the scenes of the pandemic, there was such a nice oral and visual cadence to it, and and that was good, because when you got the personal testimony, you went so far in with the people, and then it was good that you could take a breath out. And then your breath out, though, was usually isolation, right? It was like inhalation. People were inhaling. You were inhaling these people's pain and their stories, and then it would cut out outside of yourself, and outside of yourself was the polar opposite. So I like that. I thought you achieved a really nice, a really nice cadence with it, and it was more than successful. What you wanted to achieve was it was like music. You hit the notes, man. you hit the notes on this. And so thank you.
I mean, there's the science around the vaccine and around the virus, and the longer it goes on, we know more about it. But the consistent thing that I've come across that sometimes I find people not willing to either accept or recognize is the emotional component that I think you tapped into in the film. And so because over this time, because I've worked with healthcare workers, I've worked with school administrators, teachers. We're talking about the impact on kids. I have seen so many people suffer, so many people having to deal with loss in terms of death, and me having reactions of people kind of minimizing that. Because I know when it first came off, one of my clients was telling me about a relative who was from New York City, who she lives down here, but she was minimizing the impact of the virus because she said, well, that's up north and we're down here in Georgia. So that's, I'm like, the virus has no boundaries. And so I just found a lot of people just not being ready to deal with the realities of what the situation was. So like with the young client that I had mentioned in the documentary, I had to go back to I'm 61. So I had to go back to like the late 60s and 70s when it was like the riding over the Vietnam War and other things. They're like, look, that happened. I remember all that stuff in the streets of Brooklyn or whatever, but that passed. This too will pass. And so I think a lot, it's a new reality. And so you got to accept that this is new reality. Because if you accept that this is new reality, you can come up with new opportunities to live a full life. Not everything that has happened for people during this time has been devastating. Because I've had some clients, actually, their lives have gotten better. Their relationships have gotten better. They've gotten job promotions or new jobs. They became parents or grandparents, but they felt guilty kind of talking about it. But it's a mental shift that has to occur. So it's not only the professionals and not only clients, it's everybody has to do that. Talk to people who haven't seen this video to remind people of what's at stake in terms of their mental health, their spiritual health, and encourage people to kind of stay on top of this because people are getting lax.
I'm overwhelmed by it. I just want to give you a 5-star review and just leave it at that. I
just want to say this to you, Emmett. This project that you was given, it came from God. It takes a special person to make other people feel comfortable to share that trauma that a lot of people haven't even addressed yet. You have to be in a comfortable space with a comfortable person to even open up. That's why when your film was going through, I was able to feel some stuff, like I said, I didn't even know I had even addressed, So I thank God for you. You've always been that open, friendly guy, that my yogi, when anybody can sit down and just talk. You feel the love when you sit down and talk with you. And it's very important. And I'm looking forward to more of your documentaries, like I said, from this.